Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Are seemingly unrelated paranormal phenomena actually related? Are there life forms as yet unknown to science? What are self-organizing plasmas?
Hello, and welcome to the 997th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app, from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul, and today we bring you a recent guest to continue a very unusual conversation. To join in, you can give us a call from anywhere. That's 401-766-1240, or Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com. Our guest has yet to appear. We're going to try getting him on, but at the very least we can introduce him so that we can just hop right into it if and when he appears. So returning to us via Skype today is Dr. Simeon Hein, author, educator, lecturer, and sociologist. He is the director of a research and teaching company, the Mount Baldy Institute, founded in 1997 to allow people to learn remote viewing. Dr. Hein is the author of Open Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles, and Resonance, Black Swan Ghosts, a sociologist encounters witnesses to unexplained aerial craft, their occupants, and other elements of the multiverse. Planetary Intelligence, 101 Easy Steps to Energy Well-Being and Natural Insight, and Dark Matter Monsters, Cryptids, Ball Lightning, and the Science of Secret Life Forms, which is the subject of our discussion today. And also, it was the subject of our last discussion with Dr. Hein, which was here with us on February 26th. You can look for that show. That's number 985 in the 2023 archives at BehindTheParanormal.com, or you can look it up via whatever your favorite podcast platform is.
Well, we hope that Dr. Hein will join us soon. This is uncharacteristic. I hope everything's okay. We will keep trying to raise him. In the meantime, why don't we go to one of our questionnaires that came in. We don't often have a chance to do that. And Benny, keep one eye on the screen, one eye on the questionnaire.
Yes, you better believe that I will be cross-eyed by the end of today's show. So we're going to read from this questionnaire at the moment, and it's not often we get to do this, so we can consider this a little blessing in disguise. So the experiencer here talks about their experience with Bigfoot, that an entity communicated or tried to communicate with them, and writes, I was on a field trip in Kentucky and went to Breckenridge, a school in Moorhead, Kentucky. I had just moved there with my family from San Leandro, California. Geez, that's a move. I don't remember what state park we were at. We got off the bus, went on a hike. Our teacher said we had a few minutes of free time. Two of my new classmates wanted to show me something secretly. One grabbed my hand, and we ran to an off-trail spot where there was a waterfall. I was confused, and she said, look into the water or something else and see all these girls skinny dipping at the bottom of the falls. I was just thinking, why do these girls think there's no one that can see them? Because we could see them, which led me to look up and around, and we were mostly hidden by staying down under a hedge or bushes. But I stood up curious to know who else might see them. As I did, I looked at the top of the waterfall to see there was a stump of a tree that looked out of place, and it started to change and kept growing. I almost rubbed my eyes, but I couldn't move my arms, as if it was the thing that was growing wasn't making sense of my vision, or my vision trying to make sense of it. It was huge, and my eyes told me it was not a bear. But my mind said it must be a bear. But my eyes saw, and then my mind saw, and I wanted to warn the girls in the water. It was fully standing now. I could only think of the girls below. They were laughing and splashing. I couldn't see their features, but I saw them, and I felt terrified, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was looking at it and telling myself monsters weren't real. Then I realized I had to be loud and tried to point it out. But it turned halfway around towards me, and I was thinking, wait, I can see it. Can it see me? Yes. And something the experiencer writes is mind speak, which is interesting. It told me, yes, I can. Then I thought if I screamed, could it get to me faster than I screamed, and I looked into the distance, and all the while not breaking eye contact. When I had first seen it, it looked at me with what I thought was evil hatred. And then, I mean this in seconds, when I was trying to scream, I heard, "Yes, I can see you, and I can be there in a second." The look changed to almost of "This will be your choice." My new classmates, still hidden under the hedge height, as I tried to raise my hand, they jerked me down and said, "What are you doing, you dummy? You're giving us away." She had my hand and pulled me and had me run faster, and we ducked, and we were back with our class. I felt so weird. I now know I was in shock, and the teacher was looking at me and said, "Are you okay?" I tried to speak, but my two classmates who had shown me the sight were shaking their heads in disbelief that I would give them up, so I said nothing. I got on the bus. My head hurt. I was so tired and afraid and confused at the same time. I thought they saw it too, but it was something, we don't, tell adults. I don't remember talking to anyone else. I sat alone on the bus, praying I would make it without throwing up. I was sure I was a coward and was sick for days, watching the newspaper for reports of dead girls. My family asked why I was looking so frantically in the newspaper, and I just said for school. I never told anybody. I blocked it out a time after. I couldn't really process it, and it was killing me. I don't know when it was buried, but I was a child of 15 or 16. I just can't remember. I just remembered when I was in my late 50s, I heard a podcast, and it was identical to what I felt all the way back then. I'm 65 now, and it's been 8 years since I've remembered it, and it haunts me every day. I've told a few people, but the looks on their faces, I have a daughter and grandchildren. It's something I see will make them doubt who I am. Maybe it will change an innocence for them that would be harmful. I do feel that I'm not living my truth, and unfortunately, until you see, you can't. I remember an experience with my brother in California that wasn't clear until I had an experience in Kentucky. He says he can't remember, but I look and I remembered him, or I reminded him. He had that same look of terror, and he basically said the same thing to me, that I needed to run, and as he ran past me, I never looked back. But I remember the look in his eyes, and I didn't want to see what he saw. And she goes on to basically fill in all of the things, but essentially that experience kind of tells the whole.
Yeah, we can take those one at a time.
Yeah.
And this is from Diane in Utah. Thank you, Diane. That has to be one of the most unusual Bigfoot stories I've ever heard. A couple of questions, of course. How did the classmate know that people would be swimming there unless the classmate knew who they were and their schedule? And what was the Bigfoot doing there, if that's what it was? Apparently it was. Seeing these creatures is one thing, but attempted communication is unusual, but it is reported. In my one, perhaps two encounters with that sort of cryptid, one in 1967 before I was even doing this, and again in 2016 in Pennsylvania, I felt no attempt to communicate. When you were experiencing the what we dubbed the Woonsocket Wild Man in the woods above between Woonsocket and North Smithfield on Woonsocket Hill, did you feel any attempt to communicate?
If we're being honest, I didn't want to.
No.
So, I mean, I'm like 16 years old. I'm working my first job. I'm exhausted, and I just kind of want to go home. The last thing I want to do is be bothered by some mystical entity, if that's indeed what it was.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. But then it raises another question, which is, how do we know it's attempting to communicate with us? There's this constant theme throughout human culture where there's references to like faces and such. And so one of the sort of ancient ideas is that like your portions of your body, right? They give you different powers. So one of your feet symbolize the power of movement. Your face symbolizes the power of communication. Your eyes are not just squishy little balls in your head; they give you the power of sight, etc., etc. Or like your right arm is considered a sign of power. So that's why you shake with your right hand or whatever. It's like all these little portions of human interaction that have very deep metaphysical meanings. And so one of the things that I always find really interesting is if it shows its face, right? We have that whole thing where show your face, right? Coward. And it's like, that it's like a goading thing, right? You don't want to communicate with me, show me your face. Right? Same thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the way that communication sort of initiated in a lot of these things, it's like you find very visceral things, like they're smacking trees with sticks, or like they're sort of like howling, or whatever, and then you have these more mystical things that are kind of going on, and it makes me wonder if it's like how we interact with the phenomena, like we brought up in our show last week, right? And it's how we interact with it, and sort of how we interpret it. With our show last week with Philip Kinsella, whose whole thing was we kind of agreeing with us that what we bring to the event is what we get out of it, and it doesn't make it any less real, I don't think. But it's how we interpret it, because it's kind of hard for me to say, right? Because I've never had that experience. It's the whole problem with the subject-object problem that philosophers have been debating over for centuries at this point. And I think really at the end of the day, it's like we don't really know, because we weren't the ones who experienced it. I mean, even Aristotle says you can't know the essence of events. All we really have is just kind of knowing the energies, quote unquote, of it, how it affects the world around us, and how we see it impacting the world around us. And those are kind of the energies that we have now, right? Not energies as in, ooh, electric vibrations, but energies as in kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. Like ripple effects, as they interact with us, right? This woman's experience, very traumatic, obviously. Contrasting with your very mystical experience you had with Bigfoot, and I always find that really fascinating in how these different experiences, we have no idea about the essence of them, because I wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
All I know is how it's affected you, and all I know is how this has affected poor Diane here. And
Yeah.
so I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the subject-object problem. And I don't think we're ever really going to know the object in this scenario, only because it's like all we really have is just the tools that we have to interpret the experience.
Well, oddly enough, this questionnaire has questions, so let's go through some of Diane's answers. The question here after the narrative: what were your impressions or feelings during this experience? And she said, I felt in immediate danger. All right, just the opposite of mine. If whatever you experienced reacted to your response above, please describe that reaction. And she said, yes, he responded to my thoughts with his voice in my mind, as you narrated, Ben. And then there's the Oz effect. And the answer here, before, during, or after this experience, I felt somehow detached from the world, or that there was an invisible wall between me and my daily life. I had other but similar impressions. Now that's interesting, because we consider that the Oz effect, or the a variation on the Leinster effect, a term we came up with, to express the experience of passing between one world and another in conscious ways, this being the multiple worlds in the multiverse that we're always talking about, if that theory is true. We happen to believe that it is. So, being cut off from daily life, a feeling of detachment, can be a very valuable spiritual experience, or it can be a symptom of chronic depression. So
Well, there's a difference between detachment and disassociation,
that's true.
and I think that's an important distinction to make because
Maybe
this sounds
she's talking about this disassociation. Yeah.
right, because that's a very traumatic experience, and it's like, and I find it really interesting because there's this neurological thing that happens because all those little lumps in our brain and all those little neurological paths that are created, they're created basically as like little information highways. This was explained to me by a psychologist once, and I thought it was super interesting. I always find neurology super interesting because the more we do things, there's sort of these little highways in our brain that kind of, we just keep doing it and forcing it and forcing it. It's like every day, right? Every day you wake up, you get out of bed, and then you have your morning routine, as it's called. And if you ever try to change your morning routine, you always find it really hard, especially if you've been doing it for a while. The psychologist I was talking to was basically saying, well, think of it like a road. The more you use a road, it's like, you kind of keep up with it. You wouldn't know it sometimes, depending on where you live, but you keep up with it, you keep up maintenance, etc. But then the roads you don't use, they kind of fall into disrepair. So you gradually forget those roads, but the paths are still there. And so as you're dealing with these things, it's like keeping something like that bottled up in you for like 50 something years. That's like that does a lot of damage because it's like not to reprimand, not what I'm trying to say, but it does a lot of damage only because you're keeping these experiences in and it creates this stress response. So, you block it out, you push it away, you don't think about it for a long time, and then you hear something on a podcast, as she says, and it reminds her of that event because that neurological pattern and pathway was already established for that stress response, right? It's like, humans, the way we respond to stress now, right? Our body doesn't differentiate situations. Whatever is stressful. Whether you're a Neanderthal running from a lion or your boss comes up to you and yells at you at work, your body's response is exactly the same. It doesn't differentiate between stressors. So if you're in a situation that reminds you of something that gives you stress, especially something like that, then boom, of course you'll have that exact same response and it'll feel exactly the same. So I think it's important that we don't compartmentalize everything because yeah, sure, it is indeed an experience where you become more aware of the multiverse sort of unintentionally, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect you on a psychological level or emotional level or even on a day-to-day mundane level. All these things are layers in the same experience. I think that we have this tendency to compartmentalize everything, unfortunately, due to our lovely modern world, where it's like, I'm not feeling great. Well, here, take a pill. And it's like, well, that doesn't really fix anything. It's like, what's the root of the problem? What's the root cause? And it could be a plethora of things, And so you have to treat things until you eventually get to the source. And so it's, and it affects you in many different ways. It's like, if you're stressed out, because we're going to go with that metaphor, your body responds by lowering stomach acid. So people who have like chronic stress tend to have a lot of heartburn. Usually a doctor will say, well, I'll just take Pepto-Bismol. And it's like, okay, well, that, takes it away for a little bit. But the problem is, your stomach doesn't have enough stomach acid to digest things. So you get acid reflux, et cetera, et cetera. So the big issues, it doesn't, just affect one thing. It's definitely, a multi-level experience.
So my editor's hat is kicking in, and you are become is not incorrect. It's just an archaic form. So that was a good one. I like archaic stuff sometimes. And this is very interesting from Diana's answers here, or Diana, I should say. If you were with others, please describe your reaction. They didn't see, was her answer. Now that indicates, of course, a subjective experience, but that doesn't mean the experience wasn't true. People often think that if everybody didn't see it, because we run into that all the time, particularly with UFO cases. You have a large group of people Some people see it, some people don't. Now you see it, now you don't. So I find that quite interesting. That means she was attuned to the, in my terms, the parallel world where this thing was existing or came from.
Well, then the other question is, why would they take her to that spot specifically?
Yeah, I know it.
That's the other side of the coin. Is
Yeah.
Unless they were seeing something else, but then they just never talked about it again, so we'll
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know. Maybe they talked about it later in life. I
Yeah,
don't
there's
know.
really only so much a questionnaire can bring
Yeah.
up sometimes.
And here's a big one. Have you had other paranormal experiences during your life? And Diane answers, I have had other experiences in my life that could be considered paranormal. And at the same time, she says, I had no interest in the paranormal before my experience. So I think we're going to write to Diane, who did not leave her email address here, unfortunately, and we will attempt to contact her one way or the other and find out some more about her experiences. But again, very, very interesting experience of this kind. But I emphasize again that just because something is subjective doesn't mean that it's not true. Just because someone has particular feelings that are very different from someone else, then it's certainly not anything that's going to indicate that the experience is legitimate. And we often talk about the factors that we ourselves bring to paranormal experiences. So and the example I'm always using is when I had my Bigfoot encounter in 2016. A little girl the year before had encountered what appeared to be the same or a similar creature on a road just below the hill where I had my experience. And hers was very far from mine. She was absolutely terrified by it.
Oh, yeah.
And has never spoken to us about it in the ensuing years. Now, of course, we were down there in 2019, had a very large neighborhood meeting. We had done that every year since 2016, but the group of attendees had grown to the point where nobody's house could accommodate them. And we had to go to a restaurant that had these really great hot dogs. And Rockton, PA, the over the mountain place, we'll give them a free plug. And that was a Bigfoot themed restaurant because everybody's seen Bigfoot around there. And Alexander Petikoff was with us then. That's when I learned the term squatchy. He said these woods are really squatchy because we were doing a lot of experience, and I should say exploring in that vicinity. And we were in the squatchy woods, at that point. So the Pennsylvania case is really kind of climaxed in a way with that UFO we got on the same trip on video. That's available on our YouTube channel, which we don't promote enough. Behind the Paranormal Paul and Ben Eno YouTube channel, and it's all free. And with COVID, we couldn't go back there for a couple of years, and now there was a loss in the family down there, and all kinds of things are going on. So
Yeah.
we do hope to get back. But in any case, we do encourage people to use the questionnaire at behindtheparanormal.com. And why don't we take our break?
Yeah, sure thing. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you live from this beautiful sunny day here in Rhode Island's Blackstone River Valley, and we will be right back right after this.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide. Hi, this is Joe Callahan, your maitre d' inside the Tiki Bar, heard Monday nights at 6 on ON Radio. It's 1 full hour of Jimmy Buffett music. The Tiki Bar is brought to you by Attorney Bob Lauder, the Carew Investment Group, Pep & Lumber, and Family Discount Furniture.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno here on WOON AM and FM radio, 1240 AM, 99.5 FM. And we are here. Unfortunately, Dr. Simeon Hein is still MIA, but we'll keep trucking along because boy oh boy, do we always have some listener questions and all sorts of things that we either A, never get to, or B, it's we spend too much time on usually the simplest of questions, because it's always the simplest of questions that tend to make things run over. So you are listening to us here, and it is actually a very beautiful day here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Nice 70 degrees and sunny, as opposed to yesterday where it was raining for a full day, which was fine. We needed all of that. Anywho, back to our discussion.
So, wouldn't you know it, I always bring the pile of questions, and I didn't bring them today. However, I remember the tone of some questions that are asked by multiple listeners over the weeks, and people are continuing the theme of subjectivity versus objectivity in paranormal experiences. I think back to Philip Kinsella's appearance last week, and the notion of what kind of stimuli would a clairvoyant like himself, and he doesn't like to use the term, I respect that because it's got a lot of baggage, experience in a place like Rendlesham Forest in England, where it's known as Britain's Roswell, because all sorts of UFO experiences took place at the end of 1980, witnessed by U.S. military personnel and British police, and we've done that a great deal on that case over the years, and we also have, interestingly, NewEnglandGhosts.com has been redesigned, although the new site is not up yet. But that particular page on that case would not load. I don't understand. I have to check on that. But in any case, I'm thinking of your experience there in September of 2012 when we visited at night with Larry Warren, one of the witnesses, and there's a lot of controversy about Larry, but recent books and research have kind of, at least according to the authors of the books, sort of given Larry's story more credence, and we are open-minded to all possibilities, and Larry is a personal friend in any case. So he was with us also, Brenda Butler, Beverly Plumridge, people who were there living in the area when that case went down in 1980. Beverly is, not Beverly, but there was also, we met Dot Street as well. But Brenda Butler was considered one of the original civilian investigators of that case. In the 1980s, so we were, and there were a couple of other local listeners to our show, but we didn't get out of the parking lot, or the car park as they call it there, when you collapsed. And I hate to keep bringing it up. I think it was significant in the
well, it is and it isn't.
Object,
I don't know.
Well, when you did, every dog in the area started to howl.
Yeah, it happens.
Pretty creepy.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just I don't like talking about it, only because it's it's one of those things where I don't know how to articulate it well. And if
the thing is, it It was an experience you had, and the rest of the group did not.
Right. And so I think it's important because, the whole subject object thing. I look back on it and I am very I guess I don't know. I'm trying to find a way. This is not good radio, me stammering and such. But the problem is I just don't have a way to articulate how what happened in an intelligent way to be able to speak about it and not sound
I
like a
respect
crazy
that.
person.
Yeah, yeah.
So the problem with it is it's mostly that, I don't do super well with just being. There has to be a balance. Like I said last week to Philip Kinsella, it's like there has to be a balance between the intuitive and
Right.
and the logical.
Right.
And there's a big problem where people focus on either or and neither the twain will meet. And that's really the big issue, I think, because I get the response trying to take things and make it more intuitive, but then you lose your footing and you tend to kind of just be taken up with every whim that you see fit and take it as quote unquote gospel. And then the other side of the coin is you just completely disregard all of it and say, well, it doesn't really matter because really all that matters is this very two-dimensional Hegelian nightmare we've kind of created in our minds where everything is flattened out and able to be explained. And that's not really the case either, because there has to be a middle ground. And for whatever reason, nobody wants a middle ground. They want either or, that's it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the big problem in my opinion. So before I go off and start saying things about it, I've never really had the time to kind of sit down and really, really think about it and be able to articulate it in a way where I can feel comfortable expressing it in a way that makes it make more sense to others. Because I can go on and on about it all I want, right? But the problem is that the whole point of this show is to be able to explain and express these thoughts in a way that people can engage with. And so if I can't do that, I'm not going to do it.
No, you just expressed the very feelings that I had when I was trying to decide whether to write my last book that we didn't write together, but it was in my byline, Dancing Past the Graveyard, published in 2019.
Right.
And these were experiences from way back, like the exorcisms and stuff, that I had worked very hard to bury. And as you said earlier so well, it doesn't work. They keep germinating inside you. It creates stress, creates problems. So much as I hated writing that book, and I'm talking particularly about experiences where, for 50 years I've been telling people, don't do the medium thing because you don't know what you're talking to. It's not always that simple, but and here I'm recounting experiences where it looks like I'm doing just that. I don't consider that that's what it was. I think it was multiverse communication through meditation, but regardless of what you call it, that's something that I just didn't want to talk about.
Well, I get it. It makes sense because it's like it's hard,
When you get to a certain age, you figure you don't tell a story you're not going to.
Right. Well, there's also a sort of healing element to telling a story as well.
I think you're right.
But taking a quick step back, I wonder, I don't know, I always find that the whole idea of being a medium, I find it a funny term because it's like being a medium of what? And I guess really it's kind of we got defining the term. And I don't know if we've ever really gotten a definition for it. I've never really thought about asking until just this moment of what exactly is a medium. And
we asked Valerie LaFaso that. She's one of our
that is true. Well,
co-hosts.
we asked a specific type.
Yes, that's true.
Because she's empathic.
Yeah.
And so we asked that question, but not the overall thing, right? And if there's one thing I learned, one of the few useful things I learned in college, well, it's only useful in this moment, is understanding a medium versus a media, right?
Right.
And so it's like, a medium is sort of a object through which we experience something, and that's in the broadest sense of the term. And it's like, okay, well, what is the media in this case? Not saying like the media being the thing that comes from the medium. And that's the question. That's the other side of the question, which is, what is it? And
Well, you've been rubbing elbows with the paranormal for the last 18 years. What do you say a medium is?
oh, well, I guess I don't know. I brought this up to somebody once. I don't know why people call me an expert, because it's
Well, there are no experts, just people
No.
with interesting ideas and experiences.
I guess, or strong opinions.
Yes.
Based on limited experience. So the other, I guess, I don't know. I've never really found a fitting definition for it. It's kind of like, it goes back to the whole intuitive thing, right? Where it's like, we intuit, quote unquote, information, by using the senses, even a sixth sense, which is ill-defined. And so by picking up, quote unquote, these senses, feelings, etc., they're then interpreted. But then the other side of the coin is, I don't know. I've never been a medium. I don't claim to be one, and so I don't.
Nor do I.
Right, and I don't understand. It's hard to understand the experience of it, because it all comes across as so. I don't know what the right word is. It comes across in a way that is just hard for a regular person to experience. So it's like, I don't know. I find it odd because it's very trusting of the world around you, and as I've been kind of playing with the ideas of Charles Taylor, right? The idea of the porous self versus the my brain just forgot what the other self was. Barrier? No, that's not the right word. Sheltered? No. Buffered. There we go. Buffered self.
okay.
The idea of the buffered self, right? It's like, the idea of being a porous individual, where you sort of allow the border between yourself and the world around you to kind of be, not really delineated. It's kind of vague. You kind of interact with the world around you, etc. Then arguably a medium is just that, is sort of allowing the border between themselves and the rest of the world to kind of be, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey type stuff, where it's like, it's not really well defined. But at the same time, it's not quite like that, because it's taking the intuited ideas, if you want to call them ideas, thoughts, feelings, etc., and interpreting them in a way that separates themselves from the world. So it's almost like halfway there, but then once you step back from it, that's where you kind of run into an issue, because you have to take these things and then interpret it. It goes back to the ideas of Greek philosophy, right? Sort of the four sort of ways in which we deal with knowledge and thoughts, and one of them, you have episteme, which is scientific knowledge; techne, which is technical knowledge; doxa, which is the knowledge of public opinion. What's the last one? Arguably, you can say noetic. The way in which we engage with spiritual knowledge is sort of in that realm. But one of the really interesting things is doxa, right? Because you use public opinion to interpret data. So you can get a bunch of data, using that portion of knowledge to, get the data points, right? It's like it's like a word problem, No, that's not really great. It's like doing an experiment. It's like you turn on the news, and every other week there'll be a report. Oh, coffee's good for you, scientists find. Oh, coffee's bad for you, scientists find. Coffee's good for you. And it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And, you wonder, well, is it good for me? And so, the problem is that they get a bunch of data, right? They calculate how much caffeine is being ingested, and they calculate the amount of grinds that are in the coffee, etc. They can tell you how much caffeine, how many grinds, how much ice, if you like iced coffee, if you like hot coffee. They can tell you exactly that. But then what's needed is opinion, right? You have to interpret the data. So by taking that data and interpreting it using public opinion, right? Stuff that's kind of known, you then use that to interpret the data. And so, an entity can tell you all sorts of things, right? It's thinking of somebody with the letter J or something like that, right? And it's somebody with the letter J who means something to you. They're old, and they're throwing out these vagaries. Let's say it's true, right? And they then take it and they have to interpret that, and then take that to somebody and say, well, Paul, there's somebody with a B that's trying to tell you something. They're very old. They know you well. They know something about your handkerchief in your left pocket or something like that, right? And then you then take that and interpret the data for them. But that's not always the case. It's possible that they're picking up stuff, right? I'm not saying that they're not, but the problem comes in with the interpretation. And any sort of thing that I've learned in that realm, a lot of it was learning how to interpret things, because that's like the other side of the coin. You can get all these points, but then the problem comes where you have to interpret it. And it's like, and that's really the big question, is what are they interpreting and how is it getting interpreted?
Well, I'm thinking of three mediums we don't have them on the show very often, but I'm thinking of three we have known over the years. Susan Shepard, the late Susan Shepard, unfortunately, has translated. But you first met her in
West Virginia.
West Virginia in 2003, when I was speaking. You were 11, not even maybe.
Wow.
And,
yeah, I was young. It was before I wore glasses.
Yeah. And I was speaking there, and the entire family uncharacteristically came with me to the conference. Bud Hopkins was also there. So in having Susan on the show over the years, I was impressed with her feet on the ground approach to this, her awareness of what you're talking to might not be legit, and the lack of naivete in that department. And we didn't agree on everything, but I think we learned from each other. Very aware of multiversal ideas. I'm thinking, too, of our good friend Valerie LaFaso, who was an occasional co-host of the show here, and our co-author on the book that seems to be dragging Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies, which looks like it might not be coming out till next year now. But she's the empathic medium. I think she's very feet on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Very aware of the dangers and very aware of the multiverse. And I think we've learned from each other. And the third in our area here, Gary McKinstry. Now, we first met Gary in, I think it was early 2019, at that big conference in Warwick that unfortunately was not publicized. And I think there were more speakers than were people in the audience, but that's where he first heard our ideas and said, that's the way I approach it. And he's been on the show, and really good fellow. So I think there are plenty of feet on the ground mediums who are aware of how it might be working, aware of the dangers, and in my book are pretty much legitimate. So, there's a certain amount of give and take with ideas, but
Which is always a good thing,
Oh yeah, it's true. So, but
the key here is the idea of discernment, and
Yes.
and using your head when dealing with these things. And so I think that Gary, Valerie, and the late Susan Shepard, they think about things. They engage with it. They understand. They may not agree with everything we say,
Yeah.
which is fine, because I could be wrong, and we could be wrong. We could have been wrong this whole time, 900 plus shows.
There are others who have not agreed with us who've been on the show. I'm thinking of, was it Susanna Martin? Some years ago, one of the a disconcerting number of guests who have passed away or translated immediately after being on the show. I don't know what that means. So that's not good. And she was a police psychic. I don't have the show number available here, but you could do a search on Martin in our archives. But she was rather adamant about the old spiritualist interpretation. You're talking to dead people. And the others that we mentioned, I think, were aware that maybe these aren't dead people. Maybe they're people still alive in parallel worlds where the laws of physics are different, et cetera, as we've explained it many times. So I think that that's a real possibility. But to get back to our guest, who we didn't have today, we will check up on Dr. Hine immediately after
Yeah, we
the
certainly hope
show.
everything's okay.
So, yeah, because that's happened before.
Yeah.
That people have run into difficulties of some kind and then not been able to appear. Not
Yeah.
very often, but we will check on that too. So in any case, his particular approach is very interesting. And as we said, you can listen to his February appearance at show 985 in the 2023 archives at BehindTheParanormal.com.
And we do hope to have him back relatively soon, because it is an
Yeah.
interesting topic, and I feel like we only just scratched the surface with it, because it brings up a lot of interesting questions, especially about the idea of sort of these sort of like these intelligent plasma based things that basically could fit the
coherent
mold.
matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think what he does that fascinates me is take our ideas, and he's a big fan of our work, and he puts the science behind it, and he really articulates it. So to me, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's kind of fun, and I think it's more interesting. Although I have this, I didn't get a chance to bring this up last time because I did want to kind of add in this whole idea of that I kind of brought up earlier, this Hegelian nightmare of taking things that are sort of abstract and forcing them into our two-dimensional world, where it's like it's all matter and that's it. And I think that there's a danger in that. Just because it adds a layer of science to it doesn't mean that it's not really a real thing. I mean, it's like
Oh, he knows that.
right,
Yeah.
and so that's why I kind of wanted to bring that up at some point in time. So it's that big, but I'd want to like dig a little deeper into it first.
Well, maybe you have a different opinion, but it seems to me that scientific materialism, at least in areas of science that are willing to listen to philosophy and spirituality, is dying. As the be all and end all, anyway. Maybe you have a different opinion.
I don't know, only because I feel like there's I don't want to say feel like, that's not the right word. Just from my observations, it's not really dying so much as it is kind of shifting focus. I think the problem with academia, especially now, is it's a giant echo chamber. And that's what it's what the ivory tower kind of always has been. Is it's a big echo chamber. And there's this idea that just from dealing with academics in a philosophical sense in my travels outside of doing the show, it's very, they think very one-dimensionally. And it's like, well, you're just like me, but you haven't read the same books I have. And so therefore you agree with all of my opinions because you're just like me, but you just haven't read the same books. And that's a really dangerous way to think, because that kind of defeats the whole point of academia, which is, you go there to hear different opinions. And I even found that when I was in college. I found it fascinating when I took a class on anthropology and it was religion and globalization, right? Which should be a quote unquote very diverse experience, and everybody said the same stuff.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was sitting there, and everybody sounded exactly the same. There was no difference in opinion. Everybody said the same stuff.
That's not science.
No, and that's the thing. And so the problem I've found is there's this accepted line of thinking that you kind of have to stick with. And I mean, granted, I graduated college almost, like 8-9 years ago at this, almost like 9 years ago at this point. And but at the same time, not much has changed. I've just, from what I've observed, if anything, it's gotten worse. So I think one of the things that's kind of important is that, there's this exclusivity that's in academia that, kind of pushes out a lot of this stuff. And so, when we had on, we've had shows talking about all of this stuff before, so it's nothing really new. I would say that scientific materialism, although not as prominent as it has been, it still holds a place culturally, I would say, because look at the world around us. It's like there are these abstract concepts that we deal with constantly, right? With the dawn of the iPhone here. It's like, we have to learn all these abstract concepts, quickly, and, people are thinking more and more abstractly. But the problem is that there's still this sort of thing that holds us down and forces everything into this two-dimensional space that we find ourselves in. You find people more and more depressed, right? And all these different social problems because there's no engagement in anything mythological, quote unquote. There's no engagement in any bigger story. It's just, well, you're living your life, et cetera, nothing really matters, you kind of come into this nihilistic existence that's brought about by materialism. And whether we like it or not, we're all, materialists at the end of the day, because it's like, well, my experience is real, but, something over there, that can be swamp gas, right? And so, we live our lives in this certain way because that's how we're trained to think. So it's not really dead. It's just we're stuck in a mold that we've been in for like 200 years, well, 300 arguably, and we can't really get out of it.
Well, just in our last few minutes, there have been something completely different. There have been a lot of questions about what we think of the modern paranormal shows.
Oh, there he is.
Oh. Well, it's better late than never. Let's answer.
Dr. Simeon, are you with us?
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Simeon.
Hey guys, how's it going today?
Great.
Well, not so great actually, because the show is almost over.
I thought it was at 1.
No. You're in Central Time, right, or Mountain Time?
Pacific.
That's even worse. No, the show started at noon Eastern, so we're going to have to reschedule you.
Sorry about that, guys.
So the casting crews will be in touch, but you hang out for the last few minutes anyway. And
Sure.
We're just talking about maybe you have an opinion on, the people have been asking questions, listeners, about Ancient Aliens series and Oak Island and that sort of thing. And we have opinions. And your mother, Ben, has been watching those, much to my alarm. But
Very disconcerting.
A lot of those people are friends of ours who are on those shows. So Maddie Blake, for example, from The Curse of Oak Island, has been he lives in Rhode Island. He's been with us in studio. And so what do you think, Dr. Simeon?
About those shows?
Yeah.
I have not watched any Ancient Aliens recently, so I'm afraid I can't comment.
Well, that's good, because we have no time left anyway. So
Yeah. No comment.
Good job.
Okay.
25 words or less. You did it.
yeah, that's right. But, hang around. So, Ben, take it away, please.
Sure thing. So we've got a couple things that are going on June 11th. It's going to be our we're going to be celebrating our 15 years on the air. and also what happens to be our 1000th show, at least in the number of broadcasts, that is. This will be a 2-hour roundtable on ultimate questions with Dr. Jeffrey Kreipel of Rice University, groundbreaking UFO researcher, Kathleen Martin, author and lecturer, scientist and experiencer Matthew Moniz, and renowned British consciousness researcher Anthony Peake. And the show will begin at noon Eastern, that's 9 a.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. UK, and run for 2 hours. And we will take questions via Paul at BehindThatParanormal.com, or you can reach us via Facebook as well.
Look for us at the Exeter UFO Festival on Labor Day weekend on September 2nd and 3rd, if I can talk by then. We plan to do our traditional show from there with a live audience on September 3rd.
And you can visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON, AM, and FM. You can also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
So what's cooking next week, Ben?
Well. Next week, that's May 28th, we'll bring you an open line show to tackle your questions on all sorts of paranormal subjects, and it'll always be those questions that are one sentence long that will probably take us the whole show.
We'll leave you today with a thought from that old 13th century darling, Rumi. Maybe you are searching among the branches for what can only be found in the roots, unquote. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.